Humanity has always lived inside systems of consequence. Hunger taught us to plan for the future. The cold nights taught us to build shelter and to create a hearth for our flame. Disease taught us about cleanliness and to remove ourselves from signs of death or decay. Every species on Earth evolves through feedback loops. We encounter an obstacle and we either mold ourselves to it or we are destroyed by it. Nature isn't cruel. It is harsh and unforgiving at times, but it's not cruel. The same nature that opposes us also gives to us a system of life and death that, like a heart beating blood through the body, nature pumps change through us, and that change makes life possible, but it also presents a series of natural consequences. For most of human history, these consequences were unavoidable. But being the intelligent creatures we are, at least we like to think of ourselves as intelligent, slowly over time we have found ways to push back the natural world. That doesn't mean removing those consequences. It means we build guardrails for ourselves. We build social systems that act as safety nets. In many ways, technology stands in opposition to natural consequence. Fire, clothing, and shelter fix many of the most basic problems we have. They enabled us to live in places that would otherwise be hostile to us. In a sense, it is a bit prideful for us to migrate north where the nights are too cold to sustain us. We bring fire with us and the ability to build walls and insulation, and we laugh in the face of the cold, although we still respect it. It is our nature to defy and push natural consequences away from us in time. Written language, in a sense, is a rejection of natural consequence. Communication was restricted to proximity and being in the right place at the same time. And suddenly we could write things down and remember them for long, long periods of time. One man could carry 100 messages across vast distances without having to memorize them. Myths and stories also are rejections of natural consequence. In the animal world, creatures cannot transmit much from generation to generation. Each generation must learn on its own. And so those creatures have developed instincts and innate understanding of the world. We lack that. We emerge as helpless babes because our parents, our mothers, and our fathers, they look after us and they protect us and they teach us. We don't emerge and 2 weeks later we're swinging around in trees and climbing onto our mother's backs. We take a while to develop, and during that development, we receive information from our parents and our tribe and our culture. At some point, we began to introduce man-made consequences or man-made laws into the mix. There were rules for the tribe. These rules were based on conflict and the resolution of those conflicts. There are forbidden territories. There are rituals that must be performed at regular intervals. These things are designed to maintain social cohesion and bind the members of the tribe together. Oftentimes, we don't understand why we do these things, but they're there for us to repeat what worked before. And that doesn't necessarily mean that these things still work in the same way for us. It just means that it worked at some point and we're still repeating it. In a way, culture, along with technology, becomes a buffer against reality. We abstract away the natural consequences. In exchange, we develop man-made consequences that take their place. A person doesn't need to know how to trap animals and how to hunt and how to fish. As long as enough people in his tribe maintain that knowledge, he can use his time to build things, houses, fires, to repair clothes, to build spears and arrows, walls. He can guard the borders at night while others hunt and gather and fish. And when he returns, there's food available for him. There's a warm fire to rest at. At some point, we become detached. We no longer feel the natural consequences, and as a result, we often don't understand their severity. Laziness sets in as we don't feel it's important to maintain primitive knowledge. These new man-made consequences, though, are no less severe in many ways. If you disrespect your in-group, you could be shunned or exiled. And their labor and their generosity to you could be withdrawn. And you'd be left on your own, helpless again, like you were a newborn. So what happens to us when consequences are outsourced? When we have food, but we don't have that gnawing hunger and uncertainty that accompanies it? What happens when we have comfort, but we didn't build that comfort? We didn't craft the furniture or build the walls or gather the firewood? What happens when we take for granted that communication can happen without proximity or effort? What happens when we engage in conflict without any sort of personal risk. And what happens when we consume without understanding the workflows and the systems that bring us these things to consume. There is a subconscious anxiety that sits within us. Unless we are 100% sure the foundations of our world are stable, there's always a fear that things could come tumbling down. Are primitive societies happier? I often wonder this. They don't have the context or even the time to sit around worrying about things that we worry about. They're still out there gathering food. They're still out there surviving day to day, tending to cuts and bruises as if they were more serious than we consider them. They aren't lonely like we are. They have rituals and initiations, and they have a core meaning built into their way of life that we sometimes lack. They have just as much as they need and no more. The abundance that we have, I feel, brings us depression and anxiety and stress. In a sense, we solved all of these problems that shaped us, but we solved them before we truly understood why they shaped us or how they shaped us. The economist slash philosopher Adam Smith, you may not agree with him. He's considered the father of capitalism. He believed that as long as everyone acted in their own rational self-interest, that things would generally improve. And the key word there is rational. In the world that he existed in, the banker had to walk past the blacksmith's house every day. And the blacksmith could come out and punch the banker in the eye if he didn't like what he was doing. So what happens if the banker lives thousands of miles away? The natural consequence of proximity has been removed. The banker has no investment in the community that he supports or that he works with. People get punished for punching someone, but they don't get punished for mishandling business dealings or losing investments. At least not if they, lost them, quote unquote, legitimately. People get thrown in jail for shooting the CEO of a corporation, but that CEO faced no consequence for his company denying tens of thousands of claims that resulted in people's deaths because they couldn't afford treatments. Now, I'm not saying that either situation is correct, but we've built a world that punishes one side of the equation. And there is something unbalanced about that. Another very contentious issue is the issue of abortion, and to a lesser extent, birth control. For tens of thousands of years, premarital sex had a consequence. You could get pregnant. And then suddenly, we solved that. We fixed it. You could get unpregnant. The thing is, I don't think very many pro-life people are genuinely pro-life. And I don't mean that they don't care about abortion. They find abortion disturbing and distressing, and they think it's wrong. But what distresses them more is that people are able to avoid a natural consequence that they feel is important to maintaining life and culture and stability. As grotesque as it may sound to some, they believe that rape, the threat of rape, was a natural consequence of women going out on their own, and they believe that women should be afraid to go out on their own because that makes society more stable and more secure. They're mad that people flaunt their actions before natural consequences and get away with it. So they ban abortion. Maybe sometimes they even can ban birth control. And they do that to restore a balance to the world that they believe is very important to the world. A lot of them don't even understand why they are for this, except that it makes sense to them on paper. That their side wants it, the other side wants another thing. They understand that they have to maintain that will, that balance. They can't give in to everything. They have to have limits. Another very contentious issue is LGBTQ issues. And we brand these people as homophobic or transphobic. But many of them are just simply trying to maintain an order that they believe is essential for the world to be the best world it can be. And while I myself support people who choose or who are born a certain way and want to express themselves in those ways, I can't quite bring myself to fully hate people who oppose them, because I understand that it's not necessarily pure maliciousness. There is a lot of maliciousness and bad intentions, but the core of it comes from a sense of wanting a stable community that worked a long time ago. And they don't want to change it. They're afraid to change it. They think that everything falls down, everything collapses. I can't fault anyone for what they believe, because I myself don't understand how they came to those beliefs. We all follow our own path in this life, and we all are exposed to different things. Wanting to hurt the other side because of what they believe is difficult for me to grasp. I understand the fury and the frustration and the anger behind not being allowed to do what your heart leads you towards. It's the same rage that drives people to commit violence. It's the same hunger that drives people into the cold lands because they have fire now. And I'm sure that there were people that stayed behind in the tropical zones and watched their friends and family leave and shook their heads and said they'll get their comeuppance, that their fire will fail them, their lives will be in danger, they'll fall apart, they should have just stayed here where it's safe. And I'm sure some of them mocked them or passed laws that said fire was banned or that you couldn't travel north of this or that mountain range or this river. I do wonder if we are becoming consequence blind, though. Not just to the issues that I just discussed, but what happens when failure no longer teaches us? What happens when we literally can't fail? Or perhaps more importantly, what happens when we think we can't fail? What replaces natural selection and our guiding force? Some say that evolution is dead. We can survive a lot of things. People with undesirable traits can survive. Genetics that would have died out long ago can be picked up and carried by others into the future. We can help people that are disabled, that have heart conditions, high blood pressure. Is comfort dangerous to evolution? And is evolution the be-all, end-all of life? Was it just a tool that got us here? And now we can step off of it like a train or a sheet of ice that we slid along, and now we step into the gravel and start marching in the direction we want to go in. I do try to seek out my own forms of meaning through voluntary minimalism, through physical training, through creative discipline. I myself want to keep storytelling alive as a form of memory keeping and not just have a Wikipedia article for everything. And, sometimes I think that maybe the question is not whether we can and should escape consequence, but the question is if we are able to invent new consequences that matter to us and that keep us moving in the right directions.